Okay, so we've seen how to make predictions using our trained machine learning model and the predict function. Now let's have a look at how we can use the predict proba function. More succinctly, what exactly is the predict proba function? Now what we might do is I might move this comment into a markdown cell, because this will make a little bit more sense, and that is a function, so that's going to get that. And then we're going to go here and predict proba returns probabilities of a classification label. Don't take my word for it. Let's have a look at the Scikit-learn documentation, because this is good practice. So Scikit-learn predict proba. There we go here. We want predict proba. Probability estimates. The returned estimates for all classes are ordered by the label of classes. Okay, so probability estimates. What does that mean? Scratches beard majestically. Let's have a look, eh? Run the code first. Predict proba. What does it take if we go back to here? It takes X. All right, so that's what we can do. Takes X. Maybe we'll pass it the test data just like we did with predict. Whoa, we get a lot. Maybe we only want to do the first 5. Okay. So predict proba returns the probability of a classification label. Now in Scikit-learn, they've used the returned estimates for all classes. So a class would be not heart disease, and the other class would be heart disease. So that's just another word for different labels, classes. Now, what do we have here? Well, we have probability estimates. Now, what exactly is this? Let's predict on the same data. So it's probably easier to understand in contrast when we use just the normal predict function. And we want the first 5 of test. All right, so returns the probabilities of a classification label. That's what we got here. So if we look, let's line up this. Predict proba returns an array of 5 different samples, right? So 5, this mega array here, the 2 end braces here, contain 5 smaller arrays, because we've used 5 here using slicing. And so does this. But within this array here, there's 5 arrays of 2 numbers. But this only has 1 array of 5 numbers. What's happening here? Well, this is what it means by returns the probabilities of a classification label. So if we look at this, let's line up sample 1 or sample 0 with this first array. We can see that the number on the left, aka 0.89, is far greater than 0.11. All right, now let's see if there's a trend here. We go to here, index 1. The value on the right is bigger. And now this is a 1. Now if we go to index 2, aka label 1, okay, the value on the right is bigger again. So that's index 1 of this array. And then we've got 0. This value is bigger. And then again for the final one, it's value 1. And the value at index 1 is greater. So what this is it's making predictions on the same data, but instead of just returning the label, it's returning the probability of that label being true. So remember our labels are 0 and 1. So if we go here, heart disease, target, and we want value counts. So we've got 1 for heart disease and 0 for not heart disease. So what predict proba is doing is going, hey, I'm looking at the first 5 rows of these. So X test, I'm looking at these samples. What I've learned on the training data, if I look at this sample here, I'm giving it label 0, so not heart disease. And I'm predicting that label 0 with a probability of 0.89. And so if we added these two together, right, the maximum probability you can get is 1. So 0.89 plus 0.11. And then if we did the same for the next one, 0.49 plus 0.51, you can kind of get the point there, right? 0.11. That's the maximum probability. So what it's saying is that this sample has a 0.89 probability of the label being 0. And the next sample here, which gets the label 1, has a 0.51. So slightly, only just slightly, does that have a probability of being label 1. So that's why it's assigned 1. When we call predict, we force the model to give us back one label. So this is where predict proba comes in handy, right? Is we want to figure out the probability that our sample is given a certain label. So this one here is basically a coin toss, right? It's almost 50-50, but the model you could probably say is pretty confident on this sample, this one here, being 0 because it's 89 versus 0.11. The same one for here, right? So this is number 3, the third index is given 0. We see this one here. So it's pretty damn confident that this one is not heart disease as well. So that's the difference between predict and predict proba, is that if we did have more than 2 classes here, so if we had like 10 labels, if you called predict proba on it, you'd get values, probability value for each of those classes that we had. But because we only have 2, we're getting back arrays of 2 samples here. And so the threshold, because we have 2 samples, is whichever one has over 0.5. So this is why this one has over 0.5 and it gets assigned a label of 1. Same with the next one. And this one has over 0.5, so it gets assigned a label of 0, which is the index of this array here. And then finally, for this one, it gets assigned a label of 1 because this one is over 0.5 with a value of 0.82. Where could you use predict proba? Or maybe in the future, right, you're working on this kind of project, you want to make sure that your model is very confident. Say we're deploying this to production, right? We're using this in a hospital. And we don't want our model to give us samples that only have probability estimate of 0.51. We want to go, hey, model, only give us the samples. So this is where we could use predict proba. Only give us the samples that are maybe even higher than 0.89. Maybe we only want when our model is extremely confident and then we'll use that prediction. Or maybe it is helpful to know which samples our model's not sure about. Then maybe we could look at that sample and go, hey, why is that sample? Why is this row? Why is the model unclear about that? Is there something we could fix up? So that's the sort of the value there between predict and predict proba. Predict will give you a single label for each sample, whereas predict proba returns the probabilities of a classification label. And remember, the maximum value here is, if you add these up, is 1. So the closer to 1, the more, inverted commas, sure your model is that the prediction it's made is a certain class. All right, so now we've seen the 2 main ways of making predictions using a classification model. I want you to have a think, how can we make predictions using a regression model? To revisit, if you would go back up and look at our regression model code, how can we make a prediction using our regression model? Say if we wanted to predict on our Boston housing data set, the median house price given a row and different characteristics about a town. I'll challenge you to that. Maybe you'll figure it out before the next video, but otherwise, we'll have a look at it then.